Live from our nation's capital, it's Deadline DC with Brad Bannon.
Hi, I'm Brad Bannon, host of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. I'm a national Democratic strategist, a columnist for the Messenger in Washington, D.C., and a political analyst for KNX Radio, News Radio in Los Angeles. If you want to read my columns in the Messenger, you can access all of them by going to messenger.com. That's wrong, actually. Muckrack.com. That's MUCKRACK, all one word. Muckrack.com/Brad Bannon. Mondays on Deadline DC, I talk to the people and players behind the politics and policies that drive our great nation forward. This week on Deadline DC, we have a variety of guests. In the first half hour, we'll talk international politics with Cedric Leighton. You may know from watching him on CNN as their military analyst. Then in the second half hour, we'll switch to domestic politics and talk to Tara Devlin, the host of the podcast TARABUSTER. Also, as usual, we have with us our intrepid executive producer, Mark Grimaldi, who makes sure the trains run on time and the show stays online. Before we get to our first guest, Cedric Leighton, I want to play this very short clip from MSNBC this morning. It's reporter John Heilman talking about President Zelensky's upcoming trip to the United States on Thursday to make his case for aid, much needed military aid to the Ukraine.
Zelensky saying, I desperately must have this money or we're going to do it, where Ukraine is toast in this war, number one. And you've got the world looking and saying, man, if Donald Trump gets elected president, they're seeing these polls and the fact that Trump's, if not the favorite, neck and neck with Joe Biden, they're saying first thing he's going to do is dump out of NATO. And the first people who are going to feel that is going to be Volodymyr Zelensky and the Ukraine.
Yeah, it is a frightening moment. And when you think about this optic of the president of Ukraine needing to come to Washington to sort of prop up what ought to be the most obvious set of military support in the modern history, given how cost effective it is to take out Vladimir Putin, it is a sad moment.
Our guest in this half hour is Cedric Leighton, CNN military analyst. He is a colonel in the U.S. Air Force, retired. He is also the founder and CEO of Cedric Leighton Associates, which is a strategic risk and management consultancy. If you want to find out more about Cedric and his background, you can do that by going to his Twitter page at cedricleighton.com. Cedric, welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. You heard the clip from John Heilman this morning on MSNBC. President Zelensky's coming to the United States on Thursday, which I think is interesting because Congress is supposed to adjourn on Thursday. And my guess is the House Republican leadership will try to adjourn the session and get out of town before Zelensky has a chance to talk to them, since they have not been able to do anything to provide the Ukraine much needed military aid in their struggle to beat off the Russian invaders. First of all, let's start with the basics. What is the situation in Ukraine right now, Colonel Leighton?
So, Brad, it's basically a stalemate. What you're looking at is the Ukrainians have been able to keep the territory that they have. Basically since the end of March or so of 2022, there have been no further gains of a substantial nature by the Russian forces. What that means is also, though, that the Ukrainians in 2022 were able to regain some territory. So about 17 or so between 17 and 18% of Ukrainian territory is still in Russian hands, in spite of impressive Ukrainian gains back in 2022. Now move forward to 2023, and the battlefield looks a bit less impressive because the Ukrainians have been trying to consolidate their gains and also have a counteroffensive. That counteroffensive did not go as planned, and it did not take over territory that the Ukrainians had wanted to take. They had wanted to cut the land bridge that the Russians have between the Donbas regions, which the Russians had illegally occupied, and Crimea, which they also illegally occupied back in 2014. But that land bridge, a new piece of land that they grabbed after their invasion in February of 2022, that still is in Russian hands, and that's the most strategically significant part of what they've been able to do. The Ukrainians have been unable to cut that because they lack the manpower and they lack the armed force that they need to do that. But having said that, it is still remarkable how much the Ukrainians have been able to keep, and that they've been able to hold on to the territory that they have at this point.
Now, you said that Russia still occupies 18% of Ukrainian territory?
Yeah, that's about right.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this question. Based on news reports, Ukraine is running out of money to fight this war. And I'm sure President Zelensky's, by the end of the month, I've read, and I'm sure the timing of President Zelensky's trip to the U.S. is not coincidental. What would you have President Zelensky and President Biden say to Republican members of the House and Senate about the urgency of the situation? What's their best pitch?
Yeah, that's of course going to be a really tough answer, but I think the best pitch is going to be this. This is essential for our security, because if Ukraine were to fall to the Russians, or if the Russians were to make substantial gains in Ukraine, Putin would be emboldened. And emboldened Putin then puts NATO at risk, which means that Europe is at risk. If Europe is at risk, we then risk the fact that we would have to support a Europe that would be invaded by the Russians. So that would invoke Article 5 of the NATO treaty. That would then result in a major war. Now, if the United States, if Ukraine holds on and Donald Trump becomes president, then there's a possibility that Donald Trump would withdraw the United States from NATO, and then all the guarantees of Article 5 would be null and void, at least in theory. Now, having said that, though, the problem that you would have then is a very powerful Russia that would have a large foothold in Europe. That would then embolden not only Russia and China, and the world that we would live in would be a very dangerous, very unpredictable, very chaotic world. It would be very, very different from the kind of world that was envisioned by Ronald Reagan back when he was doing his work with Gorbachev back in the 1980s, and then what followed that, the opening of the Berlin Wall and the fall of that wall. That was then a critical juncture where the United States was able to expand its power in Europe and expand the NATO alliance. That is the kind of area that we want to keep, and we want to be able to expand upon those gains in order to assure the safety of both Europe and the United States.
Okay. What happens? Let's take the worst case scenario here. What happens if Ukraine doesn't get any more American money? I assume they're still getting support from our European allies and NATO, but what happens if the U.S. money spigot gets cut off by Republicans in Congress?
So the Europeans will look to the United States as being the big model, and if the United States doesn't support Ukraine, it's highly likely that a lot of Europe will not support Ukraine as well. The United States is kind of the role model in these types of things, and if that happens, then Ukraine is truly at risk. The Europeans have already spent almost as much as the U.S. has in Ukraine. That is significant, and it is a lot of burden sharing that the Republicans say they're looking for. The key thing to think about, though, is this. If none of the aid is provided to Ukraine, then Ukraine is at risk of collapsing. And if Ukraine collapses, then the nightmare scenario of expansive Russia becomes a potential reality.
Hey, we're going to take a short break to give our radio listeners a little vacation, but we will be continuing this interview on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, so you can watch it there. Our guest is Colonel Cedric Leighton, U.S. Air Force retired, who is CNN's military analyst. We'll be right back after these messages with more.
I want to get back to seeing my grandbabies every Sunday and smothering them with big hugs and kisses.
I want to get back to football games with my boys.
I want to get back to feeling and touching, connecting with the people around me.
I want to get back to family dinners and my grandma's mac and cheese.
I want to get back to real grocery shopping.
No worries.
Taking my time, walking down every aisle, smelling the tomatoes and melons, having a free sample or two, or 3.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel. But now, there are vaccines. And they are the first step that let us get back to feeling optimistic about the days ahead of us. It's okay to have questions.
Is it safe?
Should I get it?
Should I wait?
Now, get the facts. Learn more at getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hey sis, missed you this morning. Kim told me you weren't feeling well, so I'm just doing a self-care check.
Oh, thank you, friend.
How you doing?
Girl, listen, my energy was so low because I didn't eat breakfast when I got up, so I had to miss virtual yoga with y'all.
Trust me, I understand.
But I'm doing much better now that I've eaten, so I'm back on track.
Great. In that case, let's get some steps in tonight. I'll come over and we can walk around the lake.
Sounds good. Appreciate you being in my business, too. Now, let me get in yours. Did you check your blood pressure today?
I did that and my squats, okay?
Okay.
High blood pressure is not going to be my friend if I can help it. See you at 6?
Let's get it. See you then.
Now more than ever, it's important that we protect our hearts and the hearts of those we love. Check in on one another and be a part of a healthy blood pressure movement. Rally your squad to take the online pledge at releasethepressure.org. Brought to you by the Release the
We're back with our guest, CNN's military analyst, Colonel Cedric Leighton, U.S. Air Force retired, who served in U.S. Air Force intelligence for more than 2 decades, and we're very happy that he has time out of his busy schedule to spend some time with us on Deadline DC. We were talking about the Ukraine. Do you have any predictions, Colonel Leighton, about what's going to happen with U.S. funding? I have to believe at some point President Biden is going to be able to work out something with Congress, I hope. What's your perspective?
I'm hopeful as well, Brad, that something is going to be worked out. It would be, given the fact that majorities in both parties and according to latest polling of the American people still support some aid to Ukraine, it becomes, I think, an important thing for the politicians in Washington to get behind it. If that does fail, let's say it doesn't happen and the worst case scenario occurs, I still think that something would be possible even after the holiday break. I don't think that's a good scenario, but I think it's better than nothing. But it's pretty clear that a minority is being able to at least gum up the works a bit when it comes to providing what is strategically essential support to a proven U.S. ally, and that's what really is kind of painful about all of this. It shouldn't be this hard to do something that is, quite frankly, so obvious.
Yeah, and my guess is if there was a clean vote in the House, I'm sure if there was a clean vote in the Senate, it would pass. I'm reasonably confident. Okay. Come back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Colonel Cedric Leighton, U.S. Air Force retired, who is most prominently a CNN military analyst. So you've probably seen him on that show, which has a few more viewers than Deadline DC. We were talking about the situation in Ukraine in the first half hour. We're going to move to the other big trouble spot in the world, the Middle East, in this segment. I want to remind our radio listeners that if you want to watch us, you can watch us on twitter.com/Brad Bannon or on facebook.com/Deadline DC with Brad Bannon /videos. Okay, in the Middle East, last week, the United States Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said something to the effect that because of the Israeli bombing of civilians in Gaza, Israel risked winning a tactical victory by taking over Gaza, but facing a strategic defeat. Would you explain what the secretary meant by that?
Sure, Brad. What he's talking about here is, in essence, it could be a Pyrrhic victory for the Israelis if they don't find a way to stop the bloodshed in Gaza among the Palestinian civilians that live there. So what he's talking about is the tactics that the Israelis are using, which seem to be striking a lot of civilian targets in addition to striking Hamas-related targets. One of the problems that the Israelis have is that Hamas is kind of interwoven within Gazan society, and that very fact creates some real difficulties from a targeting perspective. But what the secretary was referring to is the need to really be very careful and judicious in the use of military power, especially air power, which is a bit more indiscriminate than shooting somebody with a rifle or something like that. So he's really talking about a short-term victory that the Israelis are likely to achieve against Hamas versus a long-term continuation of the status quo that exists between Israel and its Palestinian neighbors, which involves a lot of hostility, a lot of fighting, and quite frankly, a lot more support for guerrilla groups or terrorist groups like Hamas than would be the case if the Israelis were less heavy-handed in their approach.
Taking a big risk here, quoting a military strategist to someone of your stature and background, but I'll mangle it. The general military theorist von Clausewitz once said, war is politics by other means. And it seems to me Israel here is at risk of winning the war, but creating a political situation which is untenable. My guess is that the Israelis are creating a new generation of Palestinian terrorists by bombing Gaza. Do you think that anybody's thinking, besides Secretary Austin, is thinking about the long-term disastrous effects of this situation?
Well, I certainly think that Secretary of State Blinken shares Secretary Austin's views, and you're quoting Clausewitz exactly right. He was very clear that war is basically an extension of politics. In essence, when politics and diplomacy fail, you go to war. But the real desire of any statesman should be to regain the capacity to use diplomatic and political means to achieve one's ends. And so what the Israelis are looking at here is, obviously they want to avenge what happened on October the 7th. They, need to make sure that their security is heightened for the southern areas of Israel and really, quite frankly, for the entire nation, so that something like what happened on October the 7th does not happen again. But you're absolutely right that, you can have a military victory, but if that military victory is not accompanied by a political or diplomatic victory, then you risk losing everything. And that's the real problem. And like you mentioned, the risk is really high that a new generation of Palestinians will be drawn into the terrorist embrace. And that is really dangerous for the state of Israel. It's really dangerous for the future security, not only of Israel, but of, quite frankly, the U.S. and the existing Arab nations that surround Israel on all of its borders. So this is a significant moment where more statesmanship and less, military bravado would really be called for.
Okay. I'm going to ask a question, which is probably a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I'm famous for asking stupid questions on the show, and our viewers and listeners expect it. Is there a risk of this situation in Gaza turning into a wider war? I mean, the United States military encampments in Syria are being attacked. We're attacking in retaliation. We're attacking Iranian-sponsored military facilities. They're shooting drones at our ships and at Israel from Yemen. And I have a map of the Middle East to illustrate the point. And it just, every time I read about something, I think, oh my God, this is like, we're like, a flashpoint away from a much wider war in the Middle East. Am I being alarmist about this or not?
Not at all, Brad. In fact, it's actually a really wise question to ask, because one of the key problems that you always run into once you get involved in something, or even, stick your toe in the water, so to speak, you risk, really submerging yourself into a conflict that you may not understand, or you may not have had any equities in before you got there. So there's a high risk that, with the United States being around these areas, both on sea and in the air, as well as on land, there's a risk that we could get drawn into something where, at the very least, the conflict could widen beyond just Hamas versus Israel. And that kind of thing is something that you have to be really careful about. Sometimes you can't avoid widening these conflicts, but other times, judicious use of power at the right moment in time can prevent things from spreading rapidly. And that, I think, is what the administration is trying to do by positioning naval assets in the Eastern Mediterranean and in
If you miss Leslie on TV this week, catch up at lesliemarshallshow.com.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Can I touch this? Where does sand come from? Is this tree good for climbing? What happens if I mix these two things together? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Storing your guns securely is the best way to prevent family fire, including unintentional shootings. For more information on safe gun storage and ways to keep your family safe, visit endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org.
What do we keep in the attic? What's this thing called? Can I ride my bike backwards?
Like I said, kids are curious. It's up to us to keep them safe. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people are coming together.
I gotta tell you, I was nervous to talk to someone so different than me.
Me too, but I'm glad we are.
Love Has No Labels and One Small Step are helping people with different political views, beliefs, and life experiences come together through conversation, and it feels good.
Wow, your story is so...
Interesting?
Yeah.
When people actually sit down, talk, and listen to one another, they can break down boundaries and connect as human beings. At lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep, you can listen to amazing, life-changing conversations and find simple tools to start a conversation of your own.
I know one thing. This conversation gives me hope.
It gives me a lot of hope, too.
Take a step toward bringing our country and your community together by having the courage to start a conversation at lovehasnolabels.
In a song about outlaws, Woody Guthrie noted that some will rob you with a six-gun, some with a fountain pen. Indeed, the big money thievery in our society today is being perpetrated by the fountain pen gang of corporate monopolists, Wall Street financiers, and Washington lobbyists. They're trying to pull off another multi-billion-dollar heist right now in the airline industry. It's a merger caper that would gouge consumers, shortchange airline workers, and cut service to communities by further shrinking competition in an already monopolistic market. Just four giants, American, United, Delta, and Southwest, now control 2/3 of all air travel in the entire U.S. The only competitive force left is a handful of smaller lines such as JetBlue, Spirit, Alaska, and Hawaiian. Currently, though, Alaska and JetBlue are trying to take over the other two, perversely arguing that cutting the number of competitors will miraculously increase competition and magically reduce prices for consumers. This is what I call Santa Claus economics. You have to be 6 years old to believe it. Here, boys and girls, is the reason that less competition is not more. All of these airlines are owned and controlled by the same tiny group of uber-rich Wall Street financial profiteers. For example, Vanguard Group, a $7 trillion global investment powerhouse, is the largest institutional shareholder in American, United, Delta, Southwest, and Alaska, plus the second largest in JetBlue. So far from fighting the Big Four, the two monopolistic wannabes would join them to rig prices even higher and make airline service more of an oxymoron than it is now. This is Jim Hightower saying the word free in free enterprise is not an adjective, it's a verb. We have to free up the enterprising competitors, decentralizing market power, not increasing consolidation.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on and know we'll get through this. Mom, we are so high up. Hold my hand.
No, you hold my hand.
Here we go.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more.
I learned patience from my adoptive dad. All he had to say was,
"Hey, you got this. Just breathe." Hey, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
Might have to start a band.
I got it.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more. This message is brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel. We show up differently, worship differently, and have found new ways to express our love and support to family and friends. But now there are vaccines, and they are the first step that lets us get back into the things we miss most. Like spreading the word without spreading concern, girls tripping instead of solo sipping, brunching instead of late night munching, and talking smack with a side of mac and cheese. It's okay to have questions about COVID-19 vaccines.
Should I get it?
Should I wait?
Is it safe?
Can I trust it?
What about pre-existing conditions?
Now get the facts. Visit GetVaccineAnswers.org so you can make an informed decision when COVID-19 vaccines are available to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
"911, what's your emergency?"
America's healthcare system is broken, and people are dying.
Welcome to Code WAC, where we shine a light on America's callous healthcare system, how it hurts us, and what we can do about it. I'm your host, Brenda Gazzar. This time on Code WAC, why are Black individuals so vulnerable to maternal and infant mortality, and what's being done about it? What will the closing of a maternity ward in South Los Angeles County, a trend happening around the country, mean for local residents there? To find out, we spoke to Dr. Melissa Franklin, the first Black Director of Maternal, Child, and Adolescent Health for LA County's Department of Public Health.
Black women, all people who can become pregnant should be able to have their babies and live. And their babies live too, right? If that's something that they decide to do, they should be able to do that, again, with joy and abundance, health and well-being, and looking out to a great and beautiful future with their child. And until that is achieved for all folks, and for Black folks, for that not to be what we see most, we're going to continue doing what we're doing to show up for families and advocating for respectful, culturally respectful, humane care with dignity and with, I would add, high expectations, that survival is not the bar. That beyond that, having a beautiful experience that you reflect on and think back on as being what you had hoped for as being the bar.
Get the full Code WAC story on ProgressiveVoices.com and on the PV app. Catch all our episodes by subscribing to Code WAC wherever you find your podcasts. This podcast is powered by Heal California, a nonprofit that uplifts the voices of those fighting for healthcare reform around the country. Until next time, stay healthy.
Go to the on-demand section of ProgressiveVoices.com or the PV app and look for A Turning Point.
For Progressive Voices, I'm John Sinton, and this is A Turning Point. Today, How Far We've Fallen, Santos edition. It is comforting to know that if you are the Vesuvius of liars, a fraud, and a cheat, you can only expect to serve about 11 months in Congress. Yes, after a full year of nearly unrivaled fabulism, George Santos, with his tall tales and mini-me approach to the kind of unrelenting, unrepentant lying that Donald Trump has been getting away with since forever, it's finally all over but the shouting for old George. The expulsion of Santos from the House of Representatives, like his idol, he promises revenge, by the way, may represent a low bar of accountability, but I'm grateful that there's a bar there at all. In addition to his idol, the King of Lies, Santos has reminded me of nothing more than the John Lovett's devil character from Saturday Night Live. I always imagined that we were just a moment away from George Santos saying, "Yeah, that's the ticket. I'm the king of the world." The House Ethics Committee spent more time than one would think necessary to come to the conclusion that George Santos was a blight on the institution and therefore must go. Well, fully half of the Republican caucus agreed with their own Ethics Committee report and voted to expel, but none of the Republican leadership could bring themselves to do the oh-so-obvious right thing. For those people, it is politics over decency and party over country every time. They wouldn't even do it after their colleague Max Miller from Ohio piled onto the Ethics Committee report by showing how Santos had stolen from Miller and his mother by charging their credit cards way beyond the legal contribution limit. From the well of the House, Miller said, "You, sir, are a crook." The regular and losing argument is to say that he's innocent until proven guilty, and while that is true in a court of law, simply not being convicted of a crime is far too low a bar when considering the fraudulent efforts of elected officials. We must and should expect a higher standard where public service and trust are concerned. After all, they are our leaders. This paragraph in Michelle Goldberg's New York Times op-ed piece about Santos and the MAGA movement really stood out to me. Quote, "That movement is multifaceted, and different politicians represent different strains. There's the dour, conspiracy-poisoned suburban grievance of Marjorie Taylor Greene, the gun-loving rural evangelism of Lauren Boebert, the overt white nationalism of Paul Gosar, and the frat boy sleaze of Matt Gaetz. But no one embodies Trump's fame-obsessed sociopathic emptiness like Santos. He's heir to Santos's sybaritic nihilism, high-clitch absurdity, and impregnable brazenism. Other politicians embody the sinister, cruel, and disgusting aspects of Trumpism. Santos incarnates its venal and ridiculous side, the part rooted in reality TV and get-rich-quick schemes, unquote. Well, I think the whole bit about his impregnable brazenness is among the best descriptors of these grifters that I've ever heard. While the phrase doubling down is descriptive, it misses the cocksuredness of it all. To be able to lie with such ease, and when challenged, to be able to morph the lie on the spot, is its own psychopathic triumph. The sheer will to never surrender to shame or decency, or let's face it, reality, is truly masterful, a pinnacle in the annals of prevarication. In related stories,